Malaysia's power struggle. Mahathir Mohamed's sudden resignation has thrown the country into uncertainty. But what's motivated this just 2 years after a surprise comeback? And what does it tell us about politics in Malaysia? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamed has long been seen as a master of Malaysian politics. His shock resignation on Monday has triggered speculation over what he may be planning. He's been resisting pressure to set a deadline to hand over power to his named successor, Anwar Ibrahim. They put aside their decades-long rivalry in 2018, and that partnership brought Mahathir back into power. Under the deal, Mahathir promised to hand over the top job to Anwar Ibrahim. Now, the ruling government has collapsed, and political parties are rushing to forge alliances to form a new one. So, will Mahathir come back to power through a different political partnership? That's what we're going to be discussing shortly. But first, Al Jazeera's Florence LOOI reports from Kuala Lumpur.
Mahathir Mohamed, in his capacity as the country's interim prime minister, met with party leaders from across the political divide on Tuesday. Now, reports say he is proposing to lead a unity government, one that would see politicians from rival parties working together to form the next government. But that idea has been rejected by the main opposition party, UMNO. Now, UMNO was dominant in Malaysian politics for more than 60 years until it was voted out in a general election 2 years ago. Now, UMNO, at a press conference together with several other opposition parties, have said if Mahathir can't even lead a coalition of 4 parties, what more a coalition that consists of 12 parties? So they're calling for Parliament to be dissolved and they want fresh elections to be held. But another possible scenario that could happen is the formation of a new coalition. Now, political horse trading and negotiations are still taking place, and it's too early to say which parties could end up having enough numbers to form the next government. But if this outcome sees the return of opposition politicians to government, then there could be more political upheaval ahead for Malaysia. Now, civil society organisations, even politicians, have called on Malaysians to reject such a government, saying it would be undemocratic and a betrayal of voters' trust. Florence LOOI for Inside Story, Al Jazeera.
Let's try to get to the bottom of what's really going on in Malaysia right now with our guests on Inside Story today from Kuala Lumpur. We're joined by Bridget Welsh, political analyst and senior research associate at the Centre for East Asia Democratic Studies at the National Taiwan University. In Doha, Anto Mohsin is assistant professor at Northwestern University, focusing on links between society, energy and environment in Southeast Asia, and also in Kuala Lumpur, Ibrahim Sofian, who's a pollster and executive director of the Mercader Centre for Opinion Research. Welcome to you all. Bridget, let's start with you. He's managed to resign the premiership and the leadership, and yet of his own party, and yet has somehow managed to keep both jobs. Why did Mahathir resign? Does he actually intend to stand down, or is all this a political ploy?
Well, I think he resigned because his government collapsed and there was a power grab within the coalition, which he rejected some of the coalition partners that some of his defectors and power grab were actually joining forces with. He didn't want to work with UMNO. But he came back because he still holds the position in terms of being the dominant political position in terms of the parties, and is seen as a stabilizing figure during this transition period.
Anto, what's your take on what's really going on in Malaysian politics right now? Was Mahathir under pressure to go? And if so, who was applying that pressure?
Well, from a few sources that I read inside Malaysia, it wasn't really pressured to go necessarily, but he was upset by a member of his own party, his Home Affairs Minister, Muhyiddin Yassin, who colluded with Azmin Ali, his econ ministers, from another party, the party of Anwar Ibrahim, who seemed to want to form a new government. And he didn't want to work with UMNO, just like it was said by the other guest. and he resigned in protest, basically.
Ibrahim, what happens next? Does the king call a snap election, or will Mahathir attempt to form another stronger coalition, one to his own design this time? To what extent has all of this done him a political favour?
I think, what's going on right now is the king is interviewing every single member of parliament, trying to determine which particular leader commands majority support. I think going by that direction, the inclination is not to have a general or a snap election at this point in time. I think an election will only be called in if the government couldn't function, if the Prime Minister couldn't command a majority for a considerable period of time. I think what we will end up seeing in the next few days is Dr. Mahathir trying to form a new coalition comprising his own party, the previous coalition that supported him, maybe parts of that coalition, as well as other parties that were, independent or, even some opposition members. I can't rule out the fact that some opposition members of parliament might split their party and join him instead. And that might provide him with the kind of majority he needs to, A, form government, B, address some of the issues that plague the old ruling coalition.
And Ibrahim, where does that leave Anwar Ibrahim? And what's happened to the agreement that there was between Mahathir and Anwar Ibrahim that Mahathir would step aside and allow him to become Prime Minister?
Well, I think the current view right now is that that agreement is no longer valid, partly because the government has collapsed and that new coalitions are going to be formed. And along with it, maybe new deals that will need to be cut with the different political parties. Well, having said that, Anwar Ibrahim's political career is far from over. He certainly commands a sizable number of members of parliament within his party, even though several members have left. And so I think he still remains a force in Malaysian politics. However, Mr. Ibrahim's entrance as Prime Minister may be delayed because, Dr. Mahathir essentially calls the shots right now.
Bridget, as we said at the beginning of the programme, Mahathir Mohamed has long been seen as a master of Malaysian politics. Would he have been aware of the discussions that were being held by those within his own party with members of the opposition who were implicated in the 1MDB scandal, which was what he was reportedly so upset about?
I think it was very clear that the talk in the town was of these particular elite wrangling and backdoor government deals for months now. So he could not have not been aware of it. But whether or not that power grab that failed on the weekend broke down, maybe from too much demands or not clear clarity on who the partners were or the degree of upset in the process, I think still remains unknown. I think to step back from this process to build on what Ibrahim Sufyan was speaking just now, Malaysia is a coalition government, and it is now facing for the first time in its history having to work with new coalitions that have broken down in terms of the alliances and come together. There are 8 different political parties, all with vested political interests and wanting to hold on to positions. The horse jockeying is intense, and many of them do not hold very strong positions, but they have enough that they can be a kingmaker or at least decide the future of the government because of the fragmentation of the system. So right now, a lot of the today has been spent intensely involving this horse jockeying and elite wrangling. At the same time, those that don't seem to be as strong are already choosing to call for elections. So the opposition, UMNO and PAS, have been mentioned. They've choosing to actually push for dissolution, which is also the call that's coming from civil society.
Anto, one prominent opposition leader has called what's happened a coup d'etat. I just want to get over this scepticism I feel about what's actually gone on, the motivation for what's actually happened here. Is Mahathir blameless in what's happened, or is this political manipulation by a master, a political master?
Well, I don't think there's any single master here, but there's definitely a lot of political jockeying, like Bridget says earlier. the attempt, it seems, to grab power again by UMNO, who used to be part of the ruling coalition for 60 years until 2018 when they voted out, appears to be one of the explanations that are, swirling around in this behind what's happening right now. But in my opinion, I think the king, Yang di-Pertuan Agong, Sultan Abdullah, will be a key figure in shaping what's going to happen next.
Ibrahim, the alliance between Mahathir's party and Anwar Ibrahim's party, indeed their alliance, was pretty unlikely from the beginning, wasn't it? To what extent was this bound to happen at some point, given the long-standing tensions within the governing coalition?
Well, I think the signs were always there that there is some reluctance in order to, for a long-standing deal to take place, partly because of the animosity. I think at the initial stage when the two men met and then subsequently cooperated, I think that was a moment that many Malaysians felt that perhaps they have put the past behind them. But I think in terms of the politics here and perhaps everywhere else, it's not just the two individuals, but also the people around them that carry the agenda and try to please their various political masters. And I think in this respect, perhaps individuals like Dr. Mahathir and even Mr. Anwar Ibrahim, despite the issues they have had between them, have never really had any serious conflict in the last 2 years. But instead, I think different actors from within the political groupings around them have been maneuvering in order to ensure that their masters, have the upper hand. And I think this is what has transpired, leading to the failed, attempt over the weekend, in the sense that some individuals have sought to obtain allies from the opposition to try and ensure a new government that excludes Mr. Anwar. So I think that's what has transpired, and this certainly will worsen the relationship between the two individuals moving forward. It will definitely damage the trust.
Okay, so you don't think that this partnership between Dr. Mahathir and Anwar Ibrahim will continue in the future?
I think it will, partly because there is pragmatism on the part of both men. I think for Mr. Anwar Ibrahim, because he does not hold executive position in government, he does not have the levers over the national machinery. So I think it's much harder for him to influence the outcome. But he is, 25 years younger than Dr. Mahathir, so perhaps he could wait a little while longer and use this time to rebuild his party and support and prepare for the next election, which will incidentally only be coming in about 2.5 to 3 years' time.
So Ibrahim, he doesn't have enough support now, at this particular moment, to form a governing coalition on his own with him as Prime Minister?
Yes, I think that's the situation, because two other coalition parties from his grouping has actually pledged support for Dr. Mahathir yesterday. And so because of that, there is enough numbers for Mr. Anwar to call upon to command majority in the parliament. So I think for now, Dr. Mahathir has the upper hand. He has potentially the ability to gain majority support from members of parliament.
Bridget, you talk about all this political manoeuvring, the political backstabbing that's been going on. And it's clear that some members of Mahathir's own coalition were working to undermine him over the last few days, weeks, months. And yet now we've had the resignation and political chaos. Many factions within the coalition have rushed to offer their support to Dr. Mahathir. Why is that? What's going on?
Well, they're politicians. Their interests are money, power. They want to be in a position of safety. political safety and future for their future. When the power grab collapsed, we can now see that some of them are scrambling to get into a potential position of a new coalition or a new arrangement. Many of the parties have split, creating a lot more of the fragmentation in the system. And now, increasingly, some of those feel that they want to go for elections and joining and staying part of the opposition. This issue of who could do better in the elections is underscoring some of the positioning they're taking in the infighting and the horse jockeying. So it's very fragmented. But so far, I want to emphasize that it's also been very peaceful. And as has been mentioned earlier, that the king has played a very important role of engaging all the sides, a sort of truth-telling on different sets of positionings, and setting the kind of a clear constitutional framework in terms of how the process is moving forward. So it's a very difficult transition, but it has been one that has been peaceful, and I think that is very important to emphasize.
Anto, what sort of political realignment is most likely to emerge after all of this?
Well, it's difficult to tell. I mean, it's in the multi-party parliamentary system that Malaysia practices right now. Each party has its own interests collectively, but within every party, there are individuals who are also not necessarily in agreement with one another. So it's hard to tell at this point. But it is notable that they've been trying to seemingly at least work things out. And some party members already mentioned that they don't want to be in a coalition with another party. UMNO, for example, doesn't want to be in a coalition with the BAP or the PAS, the Islamic Party, things like that. So to get a new coalition, in my mind, it seems more difficult than what some say that it can happen.
Ibrahim, what's your take on that? How different to the Pakatan Harapan coalition will what comes next be, and will it be representative of all of the various ethnicities that make up Malaysian society?
Well, in order for Pakatan Harapan to represent the broad cross-section of Malaysian society, it needs to address the fundamental problem that plagued them in the first place, which is the lack of broad-based Malay support. So I would imagine that if he had this opportunity, Dr. Mahathir could, continue to keep most, if not all, of the existing parties that had supported him, including his own party. But he could reach across the aisle and bring, parties from, say, Sarawak, whom I think in the afternoon have already pledged support to him, but also individual MPs from within UMNO itself, who of divergent interests from the party leadership, and because of that, use it as an opportunity to solve several problems. Number one, gain the majority. Number two, get that cross-section of support that they desperately need. And number three, also use it to expand his own party and establish, more power and control over the coalition moving forward. I think those would be some of the goals. I think the challenges, however, is counterbalanced by the need to select people to cross over. People from the old ruling party, from UMNO, may have a number of legal problems, emanating from past irregularities. And I think the biggest challenge for any new coalition is how do they convince the Malaysian public that this is truly a government that's still committed to reform.
Bridget, the Pakatan Harapan coalition was fairly representative of Malaysian society. How do Chinese Malaysian and Indian Malaysians feel about, a more nationalist government coming to be?
Well, I think Ibrahim is correct that the perception of the previous Pakatan Harapan was that it didn't have adequate support among the majority community among the Malays, but the side of that was also that there was too much representation for being perceived by some parts of the Malay community of the non-Malays. And I think this is one of the big cleavages, is the coalition going to represent all of the different ethnic communities? And the leading party for the ethnic representation is the Democratic Action Party, as well as Anwar Ibrahim's party, PKR. And these parties are the ones that are being thrown in terms of whether or not they're going to be in or not part of a coalition, especially the DAP. And I think this is part of the issue of how Malaysia is going to manage stability. If you choose to leave out one section of group, then it opens up the country to even increased identity politics and increased senses of issues of ethnic tensions, which have percolated quite considerably in the last year and underscored some of the tensions that have helped the government collapse as it did.
Anto, if there isn't a snap election, will any coalition government that emerges from this chaos be strong enough to last until the next election?
Any coalition that is formed after this political incident needs to assure, I think, the Malaysian public that they will carry on the mandate of the Pakatan Harapan coalition that was formed before. Which is to deal with issues of corruptions with the 1MDB and various other issues that they want to see be brought to justice. If not, then it may probably not last that long and may be a short term again. And in the end, perhaps the snap elections will need to be held. So it needs to assure the Malaysian public that it will carry on what Pakatan Harapan coalition was voted in for.
Ibrahim, I think it's fairly safe to say that Malaysia's economy right now is underperforming. What is all of this political chaos doing for business sentiment in Malaysia right now and the economy?
Well, I think the business situation in Malaysia has been impacted by politics for pretty much most of the previous year. I think the lack of certainty over the transition of power from Dr. Mahathir to Anwar Ibrahim, has actually colored or influenced business decisions, both inside and investors coming in from outside to spend inside the country, partly because of the nature of politics here, that as each individual becomes the prime minister, they will bring in their own team, they will replace many key individuals, and it might also mean changing some policies. So the lack of predictability does affect economic performance. I think that's number one. Number two is the issue of the prime minister's age. So even if Dr. Mahathir gets reappointed as prime minister, the questions will again arise in terms of who will he have as his successor. And I think a key signal would be who he would appoint as a deputy prime minister. I think the business community is going to look at that to see whether or not there's going to be continuity in policies or whether there's going to be further unpredictability down the road.
Bridget, I've got about a minute left on the programme here. Just summarise all of this for us, if you would. Would it be fair to say that the more Anwar Ibrahim pushed for a date for a transition, the more forces opposed to his leadership have worked to find an alternative? Is that a way we summarise what happens and what happens next?
I think that happened to the power grab, but what we've seen since that is that we're seeing a new reconfiguration of a new coalition with other forces pushing for elections. So we're going to see these two things be playing out and pushing for two different types of alternatives. Right now, it's a wait-and-see game to see if the different actors can form a new government.
Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Bridget Welsh, Anto Mohsin and Ibrahim Sufyan. And thank you for watching. Don't forget, you can see this programme again at any time just by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion on the situation in Malaysia, join us at our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And, of course, you can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian, Finighan and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for being with us. We'll see you again. Bye for now.